I never thought I would be the kind of person to share something like this, but I cannot keep it to myself anymore. It is the kind of situation that makes you question everything. Your own sanity, your trust in family, and whether kindness is always worth it. What happened still makes my blood boil. But looking back, I am grateful for how things turned out. Because karma? Oh, it had a front row seat to this mess. For some context, I am a 34-year-old woman, married to my wonderful husband James. We have been together for almost a decade, and have a beautiful 7-year-old son Ethan. He is my whole world, kind-hearted, smart, and just the sweetest little boy you could ever meet. James and I both work hard to provide a good life for him. And despite the usual ups and downs of marriage, we have a strong and loving relationship. Now let me introduce the villain of this story, my mother-in-law Linda. Linda has never liked me. From the moment James and I got engaged, she made it clear that she did not think I was good enough for her precious son. It was not that she ever said it outright, but it was always there in her attitude, backhanded compliments, snide remarks, and little digs at everything I did. If I cooked a meal, she would suggest that James probably missed real home cooking. If I bought something nice for myself, she would make passive-aggressive comments about wasting money. The worst part? She had this ability to make herself look like the sweetest, most innocent person in the world. To outsiders, she was the doting mother and grandmother, always helping out, always smiling. But behind closed doors, she was manipulative, selfish, and as I would soon learn, completely shameless. Despite our rocky history, I tried to be civil for James and Ethan's sake. We invited her over for family dinners, included her in holidays, and even let her babysit Ethan occasionally, though I never fully trusted her. James, bless his heart, always tried to believe the best about his mother. She is just old-fashioned, he would say. She does not mean anything by it. I wanted to believe that too. But then, everything changed over $50 lousy. It all started on a Saturday afternoon. James was out running errands, and Linda had stopped by unexpectedly. She did that a lot. Just showed up without warning, and made herself comfortable, like she still owned our house. I was in the kitchen preparing lunch, and Ethan was playing in the living room while Linda sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone. At one point, I went upstairs to grab my purse from our bedroom. I had taken out some cash the day before, just $50 for small expenses, and had left it neatly tucked inside my wallet. But when I opened it, the cash was gone. I frowned. I was certain I had left it there. I always kept track of my money, especially cash, because I did not carry it often. Thinking maybe I had moved it without remembering, I checked my nightstand, my dresser, even my coat pockets. Nothing. A weird feeling settled in my stomach. I knew that money had been there, and the only other person who had been upstairs was. I shook my head. No, that was ridiculous. Still, I could not shake the unease as I walked back downstairs. Hey Ethan, I called casually. Did you see any money around here? I thought I left some cash in my wallet. Ethan looked up from his toys, his face scrunching in thought. No, Mommy, he said earnestly. I did not see any money. Linda, who had been staring at her phone, suddenly looked up. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, but it was enough. That was when I knew. Are you sure you did not misplace it? She asked in that fake sweet voice she always used when she was trying to manipulate a situation. I checked everywhere, I said carefully, watching her reaction. And then she did something that made my stomach drop. She turned to Ethan. Sweetheart, you did not take it, did you? I froze. Ethan's eyes went wide with shock. No, I did not take anything. His little voice wavered, confusion and hurt clouding his face. My hands clenched into fists. Linda sighed dramatically, shaking her head. Kids sometimes do things without thinking. It is okay, honey. If you took it, you can just give it back. Mommy will not be mad. I felt my entire body go rigid. I could not believe what I was hearing. She was accusing my son. My innocent, sweet 7-year-old son. Ethan looked up at me, his eyes brimming with tears. Mommy, I promise I did not take it. And I believed him. I knew my son. He was not a liar, and he would never steal from me. But Linda? Oh, I had no doubt in my mind now. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Ethan did not take the money, I said firmly. I know my son. Linda sighed again, shaking her head like she was the victim in all this. Well, if it was just lying around, maybe someone misplaced it. You know how children can be. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that I knew exactly what she had done. But I also knew how she worked. If I accused her outright, she would play innocent, turn it around, and somehow make me look like the bad guy. So I stayed quiet. For now. But I was not going to let this go. Because karma? It was already on its way. I sat there, my mind racing as Linda continued her little act, sighing and shaking her head like she was the one wronged in this situation. Ethan was still looking at me, his lower lip trembling, and I could see the confusion in his eyes. This was not just about $50. This was about my son. This was about trust. And there was no way in hell I was going to let this slide. But I also knew I had to be smart. If I confronted Linda directly without proof, she would twist the situation and somehow come out looking like the victim. She had done it before. It was her specialty, so I decided to wait. Do not worry about it, I finally said, forcing a smile. I am sure it will turn up somewhere. Linda's expression faltered for just a second, like she was surprised I was letting it go so easily. Then she gave me one of her fake sympathetic smiles. Of course, dear. These things happen. Ethan still looked upset, so I crouched beside him and gave him a reassuring squeeze. I know you did not take anything, buddy, I whispered. Do not worry. He nodded, but I could tell the accusation had hurt him, and that made my blood boil even more. Linda stayed for another hour, pretending like nothing had happened. I kept up the act too, making small talk and even offering her coffee, but inside I was seething. She thought she had gotten away with it. She was wrong. Later that evening, after James got home and Ethan was in bed, I told him everything. At first he looked skeptical. Are you sure? Maybe you misplaced it. I expected that reaction. James always wanted to believe the best about people, especially his mother. I did not misplace it, I said firmly. I know where I left it, and I know it was gone after she was here. And then she had the nerve to accuse Ethan. That part got to him. His face darkened, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. She actually accused him? Yes, I said. She tried to make it sound innocent, but she was definitely blaming him. And Ethan was devastated. James ran a hand through his hair. That is not okay. No, it is not, I agreed. And I am not letting this go. He exhaled, shaking his head. What do you want to do? I had already thought about that. I want proof. I want her caught red-handed. James hesitated. He was not the type to stir the pot. But he also knew his mother had a history of playing games. What are you thinking? I leaned in, lowering my voice like I was plotting a heist. Next time she comes over, I am going to leave some cash in my wallet again. But this time, I am going to have a camera on it. James stared at me, then let out a low whistle. You are serious? Dead serious. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Okay, let us do it. The trap was set. A few days later, Linda came over again, acting like nothing had happened. I smiled, played along, and even made her favorite tea. But before she arrived, I had done my part. I left $50 in my wallet, placed it in the exact same spot as before, and set up a small hidden camera on a shelf nearby, angled perfectly at the dresser. Now all I had to do was wait. I made an excuse to go downstairs, leaving my wallet behind. Ethan was watching cartoons in the living room, completely unaware of the test I was running. Linda, predictably, excused herself to use the restroom. I counted the minutes. 5, 10, 15. When she came back down, she had the same smug, innocent look on her face, chatting like everything was normal. But I already knew what I was going to find. After she left, I rushed upstairs and checked my wallet. The money was gone. I felt a sick sense of satisfaction, but I needed to be sure. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the camera footage, and there it was, clear as day. Linda walked into the room, glanced over her shoulder, and went straight for my wallet. She opened it, took the cash, stuffed it into her pocket, and even paused to check her reflection in the mirror before leaving. Like it was nothing. My hands were shaking. I was angry, but I was also relieved. I finally had proof. Now it was time for karma to do its thing. I sat there staring at the footage, my heart pounding. My mother-in-law, this woman who had spent years acting like she was above everyone else, had just been caught stealing red-handed. And she had the audacity to blame my innocent son for it. My hands clenched around my phone. I had imagined this moment, but now that it was real, I had a choice to make. Should I confront her immediately? Should I show James first? Should I wait for the perfect opportunity to expose her? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. No, I was not going to be reckless. I had played this smart so far, and I needed to see it through properly. That night, I showed James the footage. He watched in silence, his expression shifting from disbelief to disappointment to anger. She actually did it, he muttered, rubbing his face. I mean, I knew she had issues, but stealing from us? And blaming Ethan? I nodded. Now you see why I had to catch her. He let out a long sigh. What do you want to do? I had thought about that. A part of me wanted to explode, to call her immediately and demand she explain herself. But that was not enough. I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions, to be caught in a way she could not wiggle out of. We are going to confront her, I said. But we are going to do it in a way where she cannot deny it. James hesitated, then nodded. Okay, let us do it. The perfect opportunity came the next weekend. Linda had invited herself over for dinner, as she often did. This time, I welcomed her with open arms, acting like everything was normal. I cooked a big meal, set the table nicely, and made sure Ethan was happily occupied in another room. She was in a great mood, talking about random things, completely unaware of what was coming. When we finished eating, I casually brought up the missing money again. You know, Linda, I still have not found that $50 I lost last week, I said, watching her carefully. Her expression barely changed. Oh dear, that is unfortunate. Are you sure you did not misplace it? James, who had been quiet most of the evening, spoke up. Yeah, Mom. Because it happened again. Her eyes flickered. Again. I nodded. Yes. It is so strange. I left another $50 in the same spot, and it disappeared too. Linda laughed lightly, but there was something forced about it. Well, that is odd. Maybe you have a ghost. I smiled. Maybe. Or maybe. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. We caught the thief this time. The room went silent. Linda's smile faltered. What? James crossed his arms. We set up a camera, Mom. I turned the phone around and pressed play. The footage was undeniable. It showed her, plain as day, walking into our bedroom, taking the money, and pocketing it. Her face drained of color. I do not know what this is supposed to prove, she stammered. That could be anyone. I raised an eyebrow. It is literally you, Linda. James sighed, shaking his head. Mom, we have been giving you the benefit of the doubt for years. But this is unacceptable. She was scrambling now. She inhaled sharply. Look, I was just borrowing it. I was going to tell you. I needed some extra cash, and I did not think you would mind. I let out a humorless laugh. Borrowing? Without asking? And blaming my son for it. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. James looked at her, his disappointment evident. And to accuse Ethan? How could you? She tried again. I was just trying to teach him a lesson. Kids need discipline. I thought maybe if he thought he lost something, he would learn to be more responsible. I could not believe what I was hearing. So your idea of teaching responsibility is stealing from your own son's family and blaming a 7-year-old? Linda's face twisted. You are being so dramatic. It was just $50. I stood up, my patience finally snapping. It is not about the money, Linda. It is about trust. And you have proven that you cannot be trusted. She crossed her arms, her expression shifting to indignation. Oh, so what? You are going to ban me from seeing my grandson over a misunderstanding. James looked at her with an expression I had never seen before. Complete and utter disappointment. You need to leave, he said firmly. Linda's face contorted with shock. James. No, Mom, he said. You crossed a line. You stole from us. You tried to manipulate the situation. And you tried to hurt Ethan. I cannot just brush this off. She stared at him for a long moment, then turned to me. You did this, she spat. You turned my son against me. I met her gaze without flinching. No, Linda. You did this to yourself. For the first time in her life, She had no response. She grabbed her purse, muttering under her breath, and stormed out of the house. The door slammed behind her, and just like that the air felt lighter. I turned to James, who exhaled deeply. "Wow," he murmured. "Yeah," I agreed. We stood there for a moment, letting it all sink in. Then from the hallway, a small voice piped up. "Does this mean Grandma is in trouble?" I turned to see Ethan peeking around the corner, his big innocent eyes full of curiosity. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, buddy. She is." Ethan thought about that for a second, then nodded. "Good," he said simply, before wandering off to play. James and I exchanged a look, and despite everything, I could not help but smile. Linda might have thought she could get away with her games forever. But karma? It had finally caught up with her. After Linda stormed out, the house was eerily quiet. It was a different kind of silence. Not tense or uncomfortable, but a peaceful kind. The kind that follows a long overdue confrontation. I leaned against the dining table, exhaling slowly. Well, that happened. James sat down, rubbing his face. Yeah, I still cannot believe it. I could tell he was struggling. This was his mother after all. No matter how difficult she had been, no matter how many times she had pulled her manipulative stunts, she was still the woman who had raised him. But at the same time, she had crossed a line that he could not ignore. "I know this is hard for you," I said gently. He nodded. "It is. But..." He looked up at me, his expression firm. "She did this to herself. And honestly, I think this needed to happen." I squeezed his hand. "Me too." We sat there for a few moments, just processing everything. Then out of nowhere James chuckled. "What?" I asked. He shook his head. "It is just she really thought she could gaslight us after being caught on video. The level of delusion is insane." I laughed too, because honestly it was ridiculous. "I know. And her excuse? I was just borrowing it. Like that somehow makes it okay." James shook his head, still amused. "And the part about teaching Ethan a lesson? Unbelievable." At that, my laughter faded. "Speaking of Ethan, I need to check on him." I found him in his room, playing with his Legos, looking perfectly content. But I knew my son well enough to know that just because he looked okay did not mean he was. I sat on the floor beside him. "Hey, buddy." "Hey, Mom." I hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Are you okay after what happened with Grandma?" He shrugged. "I guess. She was mean to me, so I do not care that she got in trouble." I smiled a little at his honesty. "You did not deserve that, you know. I want you to know that no matter what, I believe you. I always will." He looked up at me then, his eyes wide. "Always. Always," I promised. He grinned and went back to his Legos. Okay. That was enough for now. I knew he would process things in his own way, but at least he knew he was safe. The next few days were strangely peaceful. For the first time in a long time, I did not have to deal with Linda's constant meddling, her passive-aggressive comments, or her manipulations. I almost did not know what to do with myself. Then the text started. "Linda, I cannot believe you humiliated me like that. Linda, you turned my own son against me. Linda, do you really want to do this? Family is everything. You will regret this." I ignored them at first. I had nothing to say to her. But when she started calling James repeatedly, he finally answered. I sat beside him on the couch, listening as he kept his tone calm but firm. "Mom, I am not going to argue with you. You stole from us. You blamed my son. You got caught. That is on you." I could hear her yelling through the phone. James sighed. "Look, you need to take responsibility for what you did. Until you can do that, I do not want you around our family." There was more yelling. Then the call ended. James looked at me, exhaling. "That went about as well as expected." I nodded. "She is never going to admit she was wrong, is she?" "Nope," he said. "But that is not our problem anymore." And he was right. A few weeks passed, and Linda eventually stopped trying to contact us. I later heard from James's sister that she had told the entire family that I had set her up, that I was a liar, that James was brainwashed. It was classic Linda. But surprisingly, most of the family did not buy her story this time. Apparently, this was not the first time she had been caught in a lie, and people were finally starting to see through her. Karma, it seemed, was not done with her yet. One day, James came home looking amused. "You are not going to believe this," he said, tossing his phone onto the table. I picked it up and saw a series of messages from his cousin. Apparently, Linda had been caught stealing from a family friend. Not just a few dollars, hundreds. And this time there were even more witnesses. "Wow," I said. "So she really cannot help herself." "Apparently not," James said. "And now people are finally cutting her off." I leaned back, shaking my head. I guess some people never learn. But honestly, that was not my problem anymore. Our family was better off without her drama. And for the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. Linda had made her choices. And karma had finally done the rest. It had been a few months since we cut Linda out of our lives. And I had to admit, life had never felt so peaceful. No more passive-aggressive texts. No more surprise visits where she picked apart my parenting. No more underhanded manipulation to make James feel guilty. I did not realize just how much weight she had placed on our marriage, our household, until she was gone. At first I worried about James. He had been distant the first few weeks, processing everything. No matter what she had done, she was still his mother. But one evening, as we sat on the back porch watching Ethan chase fireflies, he turned to me with a small smile. "I feel lighter," he admitted. "Yeah?" I asked. He nodded. I did not realize how much stress she put on me, always trying to guilt-trip me, make me feel like a bad son if I did not cater to her. It is weird not having that pressure anymore. I squeezed his hand. "You are a good son. You gave her so many chances. She just kept throwing them away." He sighed. "Yeah, I think deep down, I always knew she was like this. I just did not want to admit it. And that is okay," I said gently. "It is hard to accept that someone you love is toxic." James nodded, watching Ethan laugh as he ran through the grass. I do not ever want to make Ethan feel like that. Like he owes me something just because I am his parent." I smiled. "You never will. You are breaking the cycle, James." He was quiet for a moment before exhaling. "Yeah, I guess I am." Linda, on the other hand, had doubled down on her victim act. I heard through the grapevine that she had been telling anyone who would listen that I had set her up and brainwashed James against her. Some relatives still took her side, but most of them had finally seen her for who she really was. Then the biggest shock came. One afternoon, James's sister, Rebecca, called him. She and Linda had always had a rocky relationship, but Rebecca had put up with her for longer than we had. Apparently, that was over now. "I had to cut her off," Rebecca admitted over the phone, her voice exhausted. "She did it to me too, James. She stole from me, then lied about it." James and I exchanged a look. "What happened?" James asked. Rebecca sighed. "She was staying at my place for a few days. I noticed some money missing from my wallet, so I checked my security cameras. And guess who was caught red-handed?" James closed his eyes. "Let me guess, she denied it?" "Oh, of course," Rebecca said bitterly. "At first she tried to play dumb. Then she went with the whole, 'I was just borrowing it' excuse. When that did not work, she started screaming about how I was a terrible daughter for accusing her." I snorted. Classic Linda. Rebecca let out a humorless laugh. "Yeah, but the best part? When I told her to leave, she threw a fit and said I was going to regret cutting her off. That she was my mother, and I owed her respect." James sighed. "That is what she always does. She thinks being a mother means she can do whatever she wants with no consequences." "Not anymore," Rebecca said firmly. "I told her that until she could take responsibility for what she did, I did not want her in my life." James was quiet for a moment before saying, "I am proud of you, Beck." "Thanks," she said. "Honestly, I should have done this a long time ago." After the call ended, James sat back, shaking his head. "She is going to end up alone." I sighed. That is what happens when you burn every bridge. For the first time, I actually felt sorry for Linda. She had spent years manipulating, lying, and using people. Now it was all catching up with her. And instead of reflecting or changing, she was doubling down, driving away the only people who still tolerated her. It was sad, but it was also not my problem anymore. One day, Ethan came up to me while I was folding laundry. "Mom." "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think Grandma is ever going to come back?" I paused, considering my words carefully. I do not know, honey. That depends on her. He thought about that for a moment. But if she does, she will not take my stuff again, right? I knelt down and put a hand on his shoulder. No, sweetheart. She will never take anything from you again. I promise. He nodded, satisfied. Okay. That night, after Ethan went to bed, I found James sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his phone. What is it? I asked. Linda texted me, he said, turning the screen toward me. The message was simple. I am your mother. You will regret this one day. James let out a dry chuckle. No apology. No attempt to make things right. Just more manipulation. I shook my head. She is never going to change, is she? James locked his phone and set it down. No. But we have. I leaned against his shoulder. We really have. Linda might have thought she could get away with her behavior forever. That her manipulations would always work. That no one would ever hold her accountable. But karma had a funny way of catching up with people. And in the end, she had no one to blame but herself. As I sat there with my husband in our peaceful, drama-free home, I realized something. We were finally free. And it felt amazing.